Welcome to Selling Circular, the podcast that explores the intersection of commerce and sustainability. This is season 3. I'm Garr, CEO of LoopLayer.
And I'm Sabira Lakhani, VP of Product at Reusable. Thank you so much for joining us. We're continuing to interview entrepreneurs and industry leaders, and as we do that, we uncover new and innovative strategies, as well as real-world examples of businesses that are doing the hard work of integrating circular principles into their operations.
We've got some good stuff, but new listeners, make sure, please, we're doing that typical subscribe thing, but it helps us as we figure out the easiest way to support our growing circular economy movement. But also, as you hit subscribe, you can also reach out to us anytime you want on LinkedIn or on our new website, sellingcircular.com.
Tell us about topics you want to hear as well, and tell your friends and colleagues as well about our podcast so we can make it better for you.
We're trying to get this word out. We're trying to move the needle here on circular economy, and I think season 3 is going to do a pretty good job of doing that.
Yeah, we're going from summer to fall, and we've got some new spice, some new flavor coming in, and I think it's because our guests have been like really straight with us, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I would like to think that, and this might be patting ourselves on the back here too much, but I'd like to think that like we've been able to build a little trust with season 1 and season 2, and people are like, okay, these aren't clowns most of the time. And we do. We're trying really hard to dive deep, to really figure this out and have fun conversations that we, again, typically only get to have at the conferences, maybe every 6 months or maybe once a year, and we want to have more of those. And today is kind of no different. This episode really starts us off, and Mike Newman really gets us going. And so as we transition into this episode, we're talking about packaging and reusable packaging. So in a world that's sort of grappling with environmental challenges, the concept of reusable packaging has really emerged as a potential solution to reduce waste and promote sustainability. But the journey from idea to widespread adoption is not easy. It's fraught with complexities and misconceptions and unexpected hurdles. So today, we're diving deep into those realities of reusable packaging, exploring all of its promises, its pitfalls, and that path forward.
All the P's.
Mike
Newman from Returnity. He brings what we appreciated, I think, a refreshing, candid perspective to this conversation about the promises, the pitfalls, and the path forward. And he has almost a decade of experience just in the reusable packaging industry. He also has a background as an activist, so he brings that passion and that spice. And he gives us those insights, and he challenges the conventional wisdom, and he's willing to do that as he sheds the light on some of the real world challenges in implementing circular solutions that he has experienced. So join us. Thank you for listening as we welcome Mike Newman, CEO of Returnity, as he shares his path from being that activist to a pragmatic business leader and what his vision of a sustainable future looks like, one step at a time.
We are always fascinated by packaging solutions, and the whole purpose of selling circular is to figure out the best ways to get consumers what they need, how they need it, while also changing the behavior to be more sustainable, more circular, low impact, however we want to ascribe descriptions like that. I'm really curious about how you both came to Returnity and then also took the helm of Returnity. And I think you bring a unique perspective here as leading solutions in sales and then being CEO, and I'd love to hear about that journey for you.
Yeah, Returnity was originally this small reusable shopping bag business out of Santa Cruz, and mostly was making reusable shopping bags for companies to use like as giveaways and things like that, and then happened to have ThredUp, before ThredUp was ThredUp, as a client, and James Reinhardt, and he actually asked us if we could make him a reusable shipping bag. I was like, I don't know, let's try. So he loved what we came up with and was actually our first investor. And then about 7-8 years ago, that investor group decided to spin off the business, just focusing on shipping and delivery packaging because it's such a different business model and application. And that's when I came in as CEO. So I've been running the standalone business for the last almost 8 years now, trying to figure out how to marry technical innovation that the predecessor company came up with, and then find the business model that makes it scalable and better for the planet and all those good things. So it's been a long and meandering journey already.
That tends to be the case that we find with circular companies. We've had experience in our own ventures where we're always trying to better understand the status quo landscape that our whatever business solution is going on, and trying to intervene at those critical moments of either client purchasing, technical innovation, material innovation. What did you find since you've been there for some time now, roughly 7 years or a little bit more than 7 years? You came in at a critical moment of that sales function and trying to figure out what those clients' needs were. How has that evolved? How did you come in and start saying, I get where this is headed and I know where I think I can take this?
Well, I would say we're still doing that. So I don't know that we've perfected that journey. One thing I've been increasingly vocal about of late is that in the almost 10 years in one way or another that I've been involved in reusable packaging now, it's been a pretty significant failure as a category, not just in shipping, but in food and basically anywhere you want to slice it. Reuse has really struggled. Packaging is literally $1 trillion market. There have been no unicorns that have emerged doing this kind of work. There's not even any $100 million companies that have emerged doing this work. If you're doing it with some sort of mission underneath and purpose, you don't achieve that mission unless you scale, and the metrics are pretty stark on that. So, from where I sit, and I think what we've tried to embody at Returnity is just to be very forthright about that. It's not a good business if you can't get it to scale, and it's not going to have impact environmentally either. And so we don't tend to stick to like our dogma. Like we don't try and drink our own Kool-Aid. We really are very, very self-critical, and ultimately come back to the core reality, which is that we're a for-profit business serving for-profit businesses. We have to enable them to adopt things that are economically viable, or else we're never going to get there. And if that's not the path that is, personally we want to take to achieve the missions we're involved in, then we shouldn't be a for-profit company. We should be doing it a different way. But that's what we are. We believe that can be an effective model. And so it's been this evolution with all those considerations in mind from the day one.
So talk to us then about it. You're saying overall from a market perspective, it's a failure, but your company is still chugging along, trying to make change. How has your approach changed as you've learned that and are self-aware of that? How does that impact your strategy?
Well, I mean, the first lesson was it's not a product problem, even though it's a product that's being used. It's a systems challenge. And coming up with a really cool reusable bag for ThreadUp, for example, that first reusable bag, they don't use that bag anymore. And they're correct to not use that. It was their clean out bag. It costs more to ship it to their customers. They didn't get them back often enough to make it make sense economically or environmentally. And they don't use it. And frankly, they shouldn't. It's not a good model for reuse. That was lesson one, was don't focus on the product, focus on the system and how the product serves the system. And then, the other part was to recognize that the time horizon for changing consumer behavior is long, and the time horizon for startups is short. And you can't really bridge that gap unless you're a very, very unique business. And so we've stopped trying to invest in success that relies on these huge leaps in what consumers can and will do. And we've become more and more cynical about the reality of that occurring regardless of what we do over the years. But ultimately, it's been about anchoring in models that can work today. System change is really slow and hard. And then when you're not necessarily addressing consumers, which tend to get more attention and more investment from brands, it can make the sales cycles even slower. But we have anchored within these applications that are working for the Walmarts and the Targets and others of the world. And as they are scaling them out, it's enabling us to kind of meet our ambitions too. But it requires a lot of patience, for sure.
I find this take so refreshing, Mike, and thank you so much for being willing to say that. Sabira, do you have a follow-up? Because I do.
Well, I was just going to say, help us understand what offering you provide your customers now? What's the product system combination?
Yeah, our core has always been shipping packaging and making reusable shipping packaging, and we're really proud of the stuff we've innovated and come up with. It's durable, it's easy to use, it looks great, it's cost effective when it's implemented in the right manner. At the end of the day, like, reusables only make sense if they're reused enough, and enough is actually like a lot. Like 90% return rates or greater to really get to like meaningful lower impact. You can't get 90% of people to do anything voluntarily, certainly not a sustainability standpoint. And the gap between like a 75% compliance rate and a 90% compliance rate is profound. And 75% is like when can you get 75% of people to do anything pro environment? Like, that's pretty great, but 75% sadly in a reuse context is just nowhere close. For us, the shorthand is that we don't really do direct-to-consumer stuff anymore. And when brands approach us about it, and they still do a lot, we tell them no, because we've learned they won't reorder and they won't commit to scaling it because it won't work for them. And if it can't work for them, it's a bad place for me to waste my time too. So for us, it's really been about understanding where are the dynamics today, sometimes in a consumer-facing context, but more in a business-to-business sort of employee-managed context, that reuse can be successful, and then building a foundation off of that instead of these sort of moonshots that are really struggling.
Well, so then I will immediately pivot into, and I'm going to table some, and maybe we can come back to some questions. Because then on the B2B front, are you really solving those poly mailer type bags, those clear bags that are bulk shipped to a retailer, and those plastic bags are opened, the stock is taken, put it on the shelf, but each individual item is packaged? Is that what you're replacing?
No, we're replacing the cardboard.
The cardboard, excellent. Yeah,
the actual box itself. Retailers use hundreds of millions of them.
So it's still
a year.
just, yeah.
It's not that visible, right? If you ask an employee at a retail store what the least favorite part of their job is, invariably they'll say opening up, unpacking, and breaking down cardboard boxes, particularly in apparel stores. I mean, they just do that. They tend to have multiple people days worth of box opening and collapsing every week for their employees.
Wow.
So they're just sitting there with a box cutter, opening, taking out merchandise, collapsing boxes, opening up, taking out. So they hate it. That's a reflection of how often they do it, which is how much resources are being put towards cardboard. But it's very hidden and not something that consumers or regulators or even the businesses themselves necessarily have thought about as being an important place to start, but it works.
You're immediately taking me back to my retail days of hating that. I was more on the produce end, but so those were waxed cardboard boxes, but they were always messing up my hands. They were always a pain. So then ultimately, what was the journey like to getting to that pain point? And that, it seems like critical, but I love what you said earlier, and this kind of hits on a question of it's not the sexiest, and that sometimes those are almost the hairiest and the ones that can create the most impact, but that getting to a consumer and getting that marketing bump of something that addressed consumers, that's harder when you don't get that in that sales cycle.
Yeah, we started calling them press release programs. They're good for getting some initial attention. They're not necessarily good for the service provider to scale with. We were on one trajectory. I think we were learning the lesson pretty well the first couple of years that we were doing it. Then we started to see some exciting growth in the fashion rental space, which is a great model for reuse because it's this inherently circular logistics model. Had a verbal commitment to the biggest order in the company's history the first week of March in 2020. Felt like, okay, we know where we're going. We did not know where we were going because the world shut down a week later. And during the shutdown days of the pandemic, we knew fashion rental was never going to be big enough to be our sole market.
Right.
But it was growing so much in those days before the pandemic that it felt like a really good place to build as your foundation. Then we had to look in the mirror and say, like, that may never come back. So what are we going to do here? So we already knew we had to bridge to something else. The pandemic kind of forced us to get there sooner. And that's where we started to ask those, some of those foundational questions of what are the models where reuse is viable today, where we can make an economic argument today. And since then, it's just been the constant push to get the right product, the right connections, the right applications, and to build the business around it.
I'm going to ask one follow-up, Sabira, and then I need to pass that torch. The follow-up I was going to say was on that 75% voluntary consumer action. Can you expound on that a little bit for an audience that may not understand how critical that is for the investment you're making in the packaging and the return and cycle function that you need to hit in order to see both the impact from an environmental perspective, but also probably an economic on both parties?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me to clarify, because it is a really important thing. And reusables, whether it's a shipping bag or a to-go cup or whatever it might be, they're designed for durability because they're meant to be reused. And so when you design them for durability, invariably you're putting more materials and more energy into the production of that item. So I like to say, well, I don't like to say, I feel compelled to say that reusables are worse for the planet until they're not. Like right. You're making an investment in a future. And if you don't get enough uses out of that, you haven't justified the additional resources that are put into the thing. So you just got to use it enough. And when consumers don't follow through in a context where that's how, the product's meant to be used, it ends up in their garage or their trunk or the landfill. You can have made the problem worse, not better. And so 75% just means, like, let's just say it's one of our shipping bags or boxes. If it's returned by the end user 75% of the time, then you're losing a quarter of them every time. And the average number of uses you'll get out of that thing is only 4 uses. Most life cycle assessment studies have shown that you don't really see a meaningful separation between single use and reuse until you get above 90%. And so and that's true in food containers and, all those things. And so if you're losing 10, 20, 30% of the product every time because consumers just like it, if it's a to-go cup and they think it's cool and they want to keep it at home, or they throw it in the garbage because they didn't realize, you got a problem. And so it just is. You just have to start from that reality point.
There's some sort of irony here that as circular consumers and enthusiasts, we're keeping the packaging because we love it, because we think it's cool, and it's destructive to the end solution. There's some irony wrapped up in that.
Well, and I think to me, the reuse community has gotten, they like to argue both ends of the sort of issue. So they'll say, look, we did all these surveys, and consumers say they're ready and they want it. So what's the excuse to not do it? And then we'll do it, and they'll say, companies, you didn't run the pilot long enough, or you didn't offer a good, and they never cycle back and say, well, hey, humans, where are you, right? You say you care about these things, we know it's important, but you're not doing it. And we don't, like, the industry and the reuse advocacy world doesn't like to face that reality. They're like, people live complicated, busy lives. It's hard to get alignment on anything. I mean, here in the States, 30% or more of people don't even believe in climate change. Yet we're going to get 90% of people to reuse a package. Like, there's an arrogance in assuming that this is actually important enough for consumers to change their lives around. And if we ignore that, we're never going to thrive as an industry. So that's my frustration, is I just don't think we're truthful with ourselves. That people have more important things that they think are more important in their lives, and we should be respectful of that.
Yeah, I think my brain is going in 2 directions. One is, what you're saying, though, is true, that we all have this, like, other priority, I guess, like, paradox, right? That we want to make change, but we have to deal with all this other stuff in our lives. But, like, isn't this also an opportunity to prove that it can work, even though if it's not perfect? Like, if you don't hit the 90%, we're, like, making this investment today to prove the concept working for the long term. Do you see it as that, like, you're in part of the journey of changing consumer behavior?
Well, yeah, I think that's a really important part of the conversation, is how do we address that gap? Because, we should not penalize new models for failing out of the gate. The whole point is you have to empower them to thrive. It's a real conundrum, though, because if you're a reusable packaging company, and there's a lot of reusable shipping packaging companies that talk about how their shipping packaging can be used for 100 uses or 50 uses, when they know they're getting return rates that are actually like they're getting 3 uses. So do you put on your website, we got this great bag. We know you're not going to return it enough. So it's only going to get used 3 times, which is worse for the planet. But we got to start somewhere. So let's do this now and make it worse for a while until we all get used to it and get better together, and then it's better. Or do you say, hey, I've got the shipping baggage and it's zero? I mean, the number of reusable packaging companies that advertise zero waste packaging is insane. Yeah. They're all waste packaging. It's like I've come to the conclusion that these noble lies are setting the industry back because we do need to be bad before we are good. Yeah. But by claiming that we're already good, I think is just actually to the detriment of the whole industry. Yeah. And it's, because then you're sort of being, frankly, I think a bit lazy. You're sort of skipping over the reality of consumer behavior and trying to paper over it. And there's companies who've been doing it for 10 or more years. We've been doing it for over, almost 8. And there's not been meaningful improvements. And so saying it works, I think when it doesn't generally work today in a lot of contexts, I think is part of the problem of avoiding the hard conversations of what it will take continue to evolve that behavior.
So I wanted to then go back to your model itself, which is a combination of the product and the system, which is you're targeting organizations as your customer where they're in a repetitive daily motion. It's almost like a closed loop emerges from there where they have to do the unpacking, they break the packaging down, and instead of the status quo, somebody goes and puts that in the recycle bin, a person is responsible for aggregating it and sending it back to you. What has changed in the system that you're offering to get to the higher return rates that you're experiencing?
So the way we talk about it is, in essence, we work in 2 placements. We prioritize two models. One is where I can show that you can you can be more cost efficient I can save you money with reusables and they will stay in circulation at a high enough level. Now, it shouldn't be a surprise. Those 2 things go hand in hand, right? If you're losing your assets all the time, it's very hard to be cost competitive. So you have to have very high return rates and low cycle costs. So there's some applications where that applies, or when you didn't have a choice. So you were regulated into reuse. And we're pretty blunt and we just say, look, we'll make it suck as little as possible. Like reusable shopping bag or single-use shopping bag bans, for example. It's a very understandable product ban, but the systems underneath it are actually quite complex, and it's creating all these counter considerations that are actually more environmentally impactful and a lot of pain for retailers. So we're helping them where they don't have a choice. But in the shipping side and where we save money is ultimately, it's not that complicated. It's you have to get it back at a very high level and you have to get it back in bulk. Sending a single-use package through the post one at a time, forget it. I mean, it's so expensive. So how do you get it back enough? Well, if it's rental, like we talked about, that's part of the business model and it's sort of a special case, very, very rare in the broader shipping market. But it's really closed, employee managed, employee driven. So today our growth is primarily how we're working with Fiore and all these other retailers on how they're moving products to their stores. So instead of moving in cardboard, like we were talking about before, they're putting in reusables. They empty them. They all nest together compactly. There's no extra air. They ship them back one box of boxes at a time. That's a new cost from a logistics standpoint. You have a new freight bill. Obviously, there's environmental impact from shipping stuff back, but when you do sum it all up, it's still going to save a bunch of money. And then also in reverse, as e-commerce has evolved and now you have all these in-person return locations, we have, a bunch of clients who, instead of throwing in a cardboard, even when it's no box, no label, which is, sort of the popular trend for that stuff, instead of throwing in a cardboard box behind the counter, we empower them with reusables like Happy Returns, EPS zones, things like that. So it's a lot of business to business employee managed. And the parallels in food and beverage are there as well. You're seeing struggles when it's a sort of to-go cup or to-go food container with reuse models, and a lot of growth when it's like a concert hall or an arena or a corporate cafeteria or a school cafeteria. That's the same basic operational model for reusable food and beverage containers that's seeing growth as well.
And so the through line being control, boundaries, physical, and I even say control probably over messaging, employee, consumer action. It just kind of, if you've got that closed environment, it seems like that just really is a recipe for success.
Yeah, and I think like those are big segments in the overall packaging world.
Yeah.
And for me, like that's exciting because I think it's building a foundation of success to grow from in all these different categories. You know, some we work in, many we don't, as opposed to trying, you know, continuously trying these moonshots. Everybody gets disappointed by it. You
Right.
lose enthusiasm, momentum, and it sort of sets everyone back to square one. I think that more modest but still meaningful kind of a component of the packaging world is where we do need to be growing
Yeah.
from.
What advice do you have for an entrepreneur, some type of existing business owner, that idea of how you got from square zero to square one through a pilot and then getting to profitability, getting to successful programs from a pilot?
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot, as you probably know, there's a lot of dialogue around pilots and sustainability broadly,
Yes.
and certainly in reuse
Yes.
specifically, and the sort of pilot culture. I think it's really important to understand there's two kinds of pilots, and you have to know which one you're signing up for and which one you're building your business success off of. There's pilots to just learn with no expectation that they are going to then become permanent programs. And there's pilots to validate the things that you want the partner to build from. And you know, reuse pilots have tended to be, in the eyes of the retailer, the first category, and in the eyes of the provider, the second category. So you see this misalignment. You know, I've got a reusable to-go mug. I think it's awesome. I get some restaurant chain to trial it. They get single-digit percentage return rates on them, and they say, okay, that was interesting. We're not continuing. And the startups get frustrated because they say, well, no, it's needed to stay in the field and you do all these things, but that wasn't what the retailer or the restaurant expected or frankly wanted. So you have to sort of, if your business relies on a pilot approach to scale, you better have a firm grounding on which kind you're going to be able to get, you know, providers to sign up for and how you're going to leverage that to reach some sort of whatever your next vantage point needs to be. If it's fundraising, you know, to justify a new funding round, if it's to justify a permanent placement, whatever it is, make sure you really know what everybody is aligned to the same end state.
So are you finding that y'all are still in pilot mode? It's kind of like question one when you approach your customers, or do you have enough case studies under your belt? Because it sounds like when you're making the case of, I can show you, I'm going to save you dollars and cents, and I have the system that you need, this should be kind of a no-brainer for retail brands. So what kind of like growth and success are you seeing with your proof points?
I think that we have, for our core business, we've mostly graduated from that, but not entirely. The reason why I say mostly is that, and this is true for any business ever, the problem we were solving in the systems we were addressing, the ground keeps moving underneath you. So like now the thing that is sort of putting us back into a lot of pilot phases with new clients. So we just signed up, you know, one of the major apparel retailers in the country for a pilot, and they're deploying them in a couple of stores, and then we've kind of got our growth path together from there. But before we went live, they use an auto labeling system in their warehouses. So the boxes of merchandise come down the line, and then there's an arm that basically slaps the shipping label on the cardboard box. Well, our reusable boxes weren't designed for that kind of auto labeling system that applied it in that lower corner of the front face of the box with this much tolerance. So we had to build a few different approaches, adjust, alterations, and then they had to pilot it and make sure it really worked, and they had to do all those things. And that's, from their perspective, of course, that's what they need to be doing, right? Like, how could they not be doing that? They're not going to, they want to use these things for 500,000 shipments a year. They're not going to invest in a box that doesn't align to their expensive auto labeling system that they just installed. So all of those things keep, it's not just a cardboard box. There's a lot of sophistication underneath and behind it, which is the reality we always have to work from. But yes, the more of those like Vioris and others I can't necessarily name publicly yet, who did the pilots, did the studies, validated it, and then scaled out, make every sales cycle gets a little bit easier for us from there.
Well, I love that, because when you're trying to adjust to a potential client, how are you and your team adjusting needs of that client the impact on that packaging and the ubiquity you need for those packages to be able to be used across multiple clients.
Right. So, I mean, that is I truly could not tell you how many times we come back to the same basic conversation as a company,
Yes.
which is like, well, should we have a standard item that you just go to our website and you order, which is frankly what most reusable packaging companies do, or do we make it custom? So we don't hold any inventory. I have zero inventory. I produce to clients' orders every time. And we keep having that basic conversation. And what we've concluded is that, well, first of all, we've asked ourselves, is that solving for that business, some of the business challenges we talked about earlier, right? Is that the reason why companies aren't adopting reusables? What about that is making that an effective decision for them that doesn't exist today? And yes, I can make them cheaper on the aggregate if I'm producing 1 million of the same thing instead of 10,000 of the same thing. But is that the barrier? Is that why it's not being adopted? And we keep coming back to the conclusion that no, it's not the barrier, right? Like if the cycles in a reusable made sense, then they would move forward. But we've had that problem creating reuse cycles that are effective, irrespective of the cost of the package itself. And then if it's a retailer that's big enough to matter, they're big enough to get their own box, right? I'm not going to go to Walmart and tell them that they have to use my size. Like, right, Walmart's going to get the box size that Walmart wants. And that's going to be totally great for us from a manufacturing standpoint. I don't need to make 1 million of these things to get it to a cost-efficient place. I can make much more modest quantities as we've innovated on the product side. So you would never tell a retailer they couldn't have the cardboard box or poly mailer bag size they wanted. So forcing that same decision on them in reuse, we think is just, to the detriment of scale. And so we just don't do it.
Are you seeing that now that employees are successfully returning and like participating in the system, that is like helping spread the word? Employees go, I'm sure they have a high rate of churn across retail employers. How does that impact kind of the word of mouth about you and your ability to sell into businesses?
Yes, they're our secret weapon, to be sure. Because part of our pilot is always hard data, how many cycles and quality is, sort of scoring and cost analysis. And, every retailer wants to do a time study on impact on unpack and breakdown time, which makes sense. And they all get the same number, which is helpful. But then there's the softer side. So we always insist, like the retail employees fill out forms as they get the boxes. And, they universally, like within a week, they're like, do not take my reusables away. For that reason we were talking about earlier, they just hate opening up cardboard. And the reusables are way more efficient. They just sort of pop open and collapse shut flat. And it's really simple and straightforward. So that part is really powerful. The modern retail is such a complicated animal. And, the person who's responsible for buying the logistics packaging in that application, that like retail store forward supply, they've got their own P&L, they're in the warehouse. They don't tend to benefit from whatever happens once it gets to the store. So if the retail store is saving 30 seconds in unpack time, that's real labor savings. They don't care. I mean, they care in the abstract, but that's not their job. Their job is not managing retail employees. Their job is shipping stuff from the warehouse. It takes a lot of, this is sort of a meandering answer to that, but I don't
This is the goal, Mike. This is the goal.
Well, I don't tend to get benefit. I can go and show the purchasing agent at the warehouse the waterfall on economic savings, and they'll tell me, well, I pay $1.50 per cardboard box. That's what my delta. I don't get credit for them saving a person week of employee time, so I'm not really going to include that in my analysis. The company does, but I don't. And they're not being irrational. I mean, that's just the reality, right? So when you have that different voice like that, no, you can't take these away from me. And it becomes less about sort of the data, which that person doesn't benefit from, but it comes up so they all work in their own different ways, but it ultimately, I think it's less about sustainability, although that's compelling and something that, I think the employees really genuinely feel as they're processing all this product and all the packaging that they know they're disposing of. I think it's a real sentiment. but it's how does it impact their personal lives that it's always like the most compelling.
We've now hit on multiple complex threads of sustainability and economic wins. How do you communicate that so that top down, bottom up, the company knows, hey, we're seeing a lot of different benefits across different P&Ls, across different KPIs for different departments, all of that. How is that communicated? What does that take for you all to try to communicate that to not just your existing clients, but a potential new client?
Well, I don't know that we're that great at it, to be honest. We're trying to get better every day. I think that ultimately what we've learned is the frank answer is you have to know who your advocates are and know how far they'll get you. And, just through sweat equity, we've kind of learned this is not unique learning for us to be sure, but look, the sustainability people can get you in the door. The ops or purchasing or whoever the business owner is where you got to live. So I think we leverage, and we've worked really hard, of course, to validate the sustainability part of what we do, but we really kind of underinvest in that storytelling, particularly because as we talked about, we're not doing D2C stuff for the most part in a shipping context. We are now in reusable shopping bags and other product categories. We're not. So the retailer isn't going to, and the data isn't there anyways. I'm just not interested in saying we have a zero waste package when I know it's not. That just doesn't feel right to me. So the sustainability teams are the conduit, but then we just got to be in the muck with the freight forwarders and the packaging and how does it integrate with box builders and all that stuff. And those are the boots and suspenders warehouse people who have a specific and important job to do, and we got to make their lives better. So we tend to really live in that space more than the sustainability part of it. We try and get there as quickly as we can.
I love that. And I'm just curious, even from an industry perspective, even the sustainability folks who get you in the door, are they more focused on circular operations like the packaging, or are they more focused on their own product that their company manufactures? And so packaging falls second. Where does packaging fall in their list of priorities?
Boy, they have such hard job. I mean, if they're still even employed, obviously, the last 6 months have been really rough for that internal capability at so many different brands and retailers. I think that it really is company by company. Sometimes there's a C-suite person who just says, we're going to do this, and that is important. Sometimes it's a regulatory, so grocery, all the reusable shopping bag stuff we're doing, they're getting regulated into it, and so they know they've got to improve. Or it might just be a personal passion of that employee, or it might be that we find the right person and do an effective enough sales job. It almost is never priority 1 or even priority 5. So you've got to figure out the way to make it the least sticky and the easiest. And it's hard. We'd be that unicorn by now. There's the market to be the unicorn. We're not them yet either. So I think if it was easier, we'd probably be there or closer to it by now.
We get to do the fun part now of talking about the future and what the future of the industry is. And we've kind of hinted at even then of the markets there. There are great companies that are vying for that business of clients that are starting to look for it but have friction. What are we looking toward? Are we seeing gray clouds ahead, stormy oceans? What is the pressure politically, do you think, policy-based, EU to US? Take us where you want on this, where you think this is headed.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think the EU, we work with a lot of multinationals, and we talk to a lot of companies in Europe. Most of our business is US today, although we have active clients in a bunch of markets. European companies, and they tend to want to tell you how much better they are on sustainability. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes. And as people may know, there's this new PPWR regulations that just were passed specifically about packaging in Europe. And they have some really explicit targets on reuse and included that start kicking in about 2030. And so I think that's dominating a lot of the conversation right now. I would say the forecast from my perspective, and so much of it is driven by that, is actually quite mixed, to be frank. Because the reuse, and this touches on some of the things we were talking about earlier, the reuse the reuse providers are in a race that they don't realize they're running right now in Europe. It's still way more expensive to use reusables. As I highlighted before, the return rates are still not anywhere close to where they need to be. So they're not hitting on cost, and the whole purpose of the regulation was to reduce impact, and they're not doing that today. If you just said, I'm not going to tell you what the industry is or what the regulation is, I'm just going to say there's a new regulation, kicks in 6 years, it costs more, and it's not achieving the social goal that it was designed to achieve. What tends to happen, you tend to see intense industry pressure to eliminate or water down that regulation. That's the race that the reuse world is in right now in Europe, and they aren't acknowledging that by 2030, they're going to have turned a corner on cost or impact or both that will justify the aggression of those regulations. So I think what's happening in reuse is you have these dual paths that are happening. You have, obviously I would say we're in that sort of more sober camp as it relates to shipping. There's a lot of examples like on food and beverage and other things that I think are really working well, that are, being more modest in their approach, that I think are building this ground foundation of success that might not get as much visibility, but will continue to progress. And then you have these regulatory driven, hyper system change intended approach that my bet is going to not end up actually happening, or at least not as people anticipated today, because I just don't, we're going to get there in a time frame that justifies it. And, the last thing we want to do is to force everybody into reusables and make the problem worse. It's just not good for the planet, and it's not good for the industry generally. So that's my guess, is that there's a lot of hype right now about what's happening in Europe. I think they're going to get a lot of cold water splashed in their face, unfortunately, really unfortunately. And by the way, if I'm wrong, then we're all better off. I hope I'm wrong, right? Please prove me wrong, right? And don't argue. You can argue with me all you want. Anybody can. At the end of the day, it's just the data. The data either is going to show it or it's not. It doesn't matter what I say. So either the industry is going to get there and we're all going to benefit, or it's not. And if I were an investor or advisor, I would say there's plenty of reason for skepticism.
I have no follow-up on that. I think just to summarize for anyone who is really what this comes down to in a phrase, is the policy is either going to get watered down or the proof is going to be in the pudding. I mean, it's really just going to either work and the companies are going to adopt it, costs will be reduced, adoption, either consumer or internal, will work, or there's going to be such immense pressure those companies are going to put on regulation that it's just going to get watered down and punted.
Yeah, and I think that, this is my product system agnostic sort of worldview, is that we're not, as somebody who's I've worked my whole career in sustainability. I spent the first 5 years at the Sierra Club, the big environmental group. This is stuff I'm a true believer. I come from an activist background. I don't think that we do ourselves a disservice by projecting this idea of some sort of utopian zero impact future. There's no, that is not how human society has ever worked. It's not how it's likely to ever work. And what does that even mean? Are we all robots who, never, is it a totalitarian state where everyone's watching you to make sure you put the bin in the right place? This is not a reality that we are likely to ever achieve or probably want to achieve. And so expecting perfection or projecting this idea that that's what we should all ascribe to, I think we just make it harder. How hard, if I were to spend all my capital on convincing my neighbors to do a green thing, I'd be way better off getting them to buy an EV or put a heat pump in than to reuse a cup. That's just true. And we can't expect that everybody's going to do all of those things. So that's sort of the worldview that I come from, which is this stuff changes really hard. It takes a really long time. It's really expensive, and there's only going to be so much change. So if you're a startup or an investor or a regulator, what's the argument that that's what's going to get to the top of the list over a bunch of all these other things that, by the way, all the EV startups and the solar installation startups and everyone else is fighting for that same consumer and that same dollar. So you better be confident that you're going to get yourself up to the top of that heap.
I
have one more question. I have one more question.
Go for it.
No, because this clarity and this honesty, you've evolved into this. Starting at Sierra and coming to this, I'm sure this is a very different person. What has that been like? I mean, how have you evolved in all of these companies?
Yeah, frankly, it's not that much fun. I don't like being the scold. Like, it's not. I know that I've sort of evolved to this vantage point that isn't always necessarily articulated in this world, and I appreciate that. Obviously, it comes. I feel like I try and come from a place of being genuine about this stuff, but it's not fun to feel like you're like the guy nobody wants to invite to the reuse party, right? Like I don't, and it isn't always that economically beneficial to us either. Saying no is, I think, ultimately been a long-term smart strategy for us as a business, but in the short term, it shuts us off to certain opportunities sometimes. So for me, it's actually been satisfying to feel sort of grounded in what I've been able to learn over the years, but then also a challenge that I've particularly felt in the last year. How do I take that and move it into a more positive, forward-thinking sort of set of language that I'm still working on? Because it's not getting me rich, which isn't the whole point, but it'd be nice, right, to like succeed in the business context with it. But it also, like, I want to see us all make progress, and I want to move in the right direction. So like finding that language is still a journey for sure.
So why don't you work it on us? Normally at the end, we like to ask whoever our guests what they're hopeful about, but you can work whatever positive material you got with us.
I appreciate the workshopping opportunity. I mean, I think to me it is about a foundation for progress. And I think that is what we all should be thinking about, is what are the foundational things we can be doing to continue to make progress, and not rely on a Hail Mary every time to try and get to where we need to go, and recognize that we'll fail. I think it's an important sort of business grounding for me as a startup founder. But I also think it's just important for us as activists and, as individuals, if we're trying to get society to like be more sensitive to and actioned around, is to stop scolding people for not being perfect. The problems are so great that it's easy to fall into that. But I don't think it's ultimately as inspiring and motivational as we would all want it to be. And so I think by being more modest today and sort of foundation focused, we'll gain greater momentum than if we just try and like skip ahead. We know we need to get ahead, but by skipping all that hard work in the trenches, I think it's to our ultimate detriment.
Well, I'd like to say thank you so much. I don't mean to speak for Sabira here, but I know I can a little bit. We are both aspiring leaders in this space, and we really want to continue forward, but we have our own crises of sustainability and circular faith. And so it's so refreshing to hear your take as we go, okay, how do we just focus on the foundation and being a building block to the success over time? And so ultimately, that's very grounding for me today. Today was a good day, but a hard day. But it was like, you know what? That's a good message to end on.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. It was a lot of fun for me too. So thanks for inviting me on.